Hey everybody, today I want to take you behind the scenes and show you how we replace the plastic on our greenhouses. And this is something the general public completely take for granted. They see these greenhouse structures and they have no idea that this plastic has a lifespan. So every couple of years we have to replace the plastic on this. And this is something, we only have 6 greenhouses like this, so it's not something we're doing all the time. But we have developed some techniques that have made it easier for us to do it. They're not always that elegant, and sometimes maybe we could be more efficient, but hey, it gets the job done for us. So big thing that my dad has done is he's attached a rigging onto the bucket of his payloader, and it allows us to put the roll of plastic film onto that rigging, and then he's able to lift it up above the greenhouse, and then we gradually unroll it across the top. And we've just found that to be a pretty easy way to do things. Now in the past, we have also had to do it in where we've had to unroll it, and then you tie ropes onto the plastic, and then you have to, throw the ropes over and pull it over the whole greenhouse. That isn't too bad of a way of doing it, but this way definitely has some advantages. Now for our skill level, it's important that we have the right weather conditions when we do this. So number one, we have to have low winds. So we find for us to be able to do it, we need to have 5-mile-per-hour winds or less. Now I know some people can do it in higher levels of winds, but like I said, for our skill level, we've got to have very, very minimal wind. And then we also find that we can't do it when it's super cold out. So we find it's easiest to work with the plastic when it's above 45 degrees. If it's any colder, sometimes the plastic's a little bit brittle. It's a little bit harder to unfold. Also, there can be some moisture or some frost that can get on the pipes or on the plastic as well. And if the plastic gets wet, it can be harder to work with. So we go for dry, we go for no wind, and we go for at least 45 degrees. And we find that makes it the easiest for us. Once we get the first layer on, then we quickly put on a second layer, and that is specifically for insulation. These are greenhouses that we inflate. And that allows them to stay insulated, because when it comes time in May, when we have all our annuals started, we need these greenhouses to stay nice and warm. So those 2 layers with air in between makes all the difference for us. Once the 2 layers are in place, we secure them with something called spring lock. So it's a wiggly wire, sometimes we call it wiggle wire, and it goes into a channel and it holds the 2 pieces of plastic to the frame. We do that on both the ends and then along the sides as well. Once those are attached, we can install an inflation blower that blows air between the 2 pieces of plastic, creating an air pocket across the entire thing. This is not an airtight system, so that blower has to continuously be pushing air between the 2 pieces of plastic to compensate for any air loss that's happening. And it does happen that we'll get little holes in there, so we try to patch as many as possible. But even with a couple of holes or some little leaking areas, usually that inflation blower is able to keep ahead of things. Now sometimes when we get really bad weather, like extremely windy weather, it can push out more air and that blower won't be able to keep up, so that always gets a little nerve-wracking. And we had that happen this spring where the wind got really bad and it pushed a lot of the air out. And when there's not that much air in, that plastic really starts to bounce around a lot. And sometimes that can loosen it up, especially if it's plastic that's been around a while. So that can be a little bit stressful when the wind is heavy on these things. But for the most part, they can handle it quite a bit. The shape usually lets the wind, blow over it, but kind of depends on the direction. Sometimes the wind will suddenly come from a different direction and kind of throws everything into chaos for us. The plastic we use has an estimated lifespan of about 4 years. So we usually get right about 4 years out of it. We have pushed it to 5 before. We've also had some years where we only got 3, and that's always in a really unfortunate situation. Usually it depends on the conditions. So remember that these are being exposed to full sun all the time. And then also the nature of a greenhouse is that it holds heat. So there's also really high temperatures on the inside of those greenhouses. So even if it's 90 degrees outside, it can be well over 100 degrees inside. That heat can wear things down. Remember here, we also have extreme cold temperatures, so that can diminish that. We also have snow load. That hasn't been a big problem for us. We've never had any of the plastic collapse because of snow. We usually try to make sure that the snow gets removed, because the snow naturally, based on the shape of our greenhouses, slides off. And as long as we don't get a big pile of snow on the side of the greenhouse, we usually don't have any problem with any kind of snow load pressure. But it is interesting to see that how much snow can get caught on there, because if it's kind of that wet snow, it can stick for a while and it accumulates and really sags down. And then usually as long as the sun comes out, it slides right off. But it can be a little stressful when there is a little bit of snow load going on there. Now there are other materials that can be used. So you may have seen some of the polybicarbonate plastic. So a lot of times it's either a single panel plastic or a double walled piece of plastic that can be used. We have that in Greenhouse 3. That has a much longer lifespan, but it is a lot more expensive to purchase and to install. There's also glass, but that's even way more expensive when it comes to purchasing. So in general, this plastic film is kind of the most cost effective. Unfortunately, it's not necessarily made from any kind of recycled material, and it's not easy to recycle. And there are a couple reuse opportunities for this, but like we checked into getting it recycled, and like the bigger places will send their stuff to Europe to have it recycled. Here in the US, they said they haven't found anybody who recycles it here. And then for reuse, I mean, we reuse some of it for like liners and some of our cocoa line baskets and things like that. And then anytime we need plastic for things, we reuse it. But ultimately, it ends up in the landfill, unfortunately. So if you know of ways to recycle or reuse, please let me know. Just realize that it's got to be an efficient way of doing it because cost is a factor. So if it's something that requires us to put a lot of time in, I hate to say it, but we have to kind of take that into consideration because a lot of people are like, oh, cut it up and give it to this and do that, or there's organizations that maybe could use it. And unfortunately, a lot of times those organizations don't need the plastic when we have the plastic, and it's not something we can just store. Sorry, I don't mean to be a downer about this, but I am a little frustrated with plastic in this industry, and I wish there were alternatives. Fortunately, we are working really hard to at least keep our plastic on our greenhouses for 4 or 5 years, so that way at least we're getting maximum use out of it. Now, I'm going to talk about this structure here because it looks like a greenhouse, but technically it's not. This plastic that's on here is a single layer of more of an opaque type of plastic. So it's not clear like the other ones. And this greenhouse, or this, I guess a lot of people call them a cold frame, this structure actually has a completely different use for us. So in the springtime, a lot of times we will put a lot of our more shade plants in here. We also use it when we're freshly transplanting, and we use it as a work area. But in the winter time is when this comes in handy. So whereas a traditional greenhouse, the whole goal of it is to have sunlight and to trap the heat, this one is actually intended to keep things cooler. So by having that opaque plastic, it doesn't let all that sunlight in. It doesn't heat up the way that the other greenhouses do. It stays a lot cooler, and it's perfect for our winter storage. Now in the past, all of our shrubs and perennials, we used to winter out kind of outside in a row. We'd put down a tarp, and then we would put all our plants in there, and then we would put a frost cloth over that. Then we had to kind of secure it so that the voles and the rabbits couldn't get to it. And that worked pretty well for us, but it meant a lot of, putting stuff down, taking stuff off. It was a lot more involved. Having this semi-permanent structure really has made a difference for us. So we're able to just bring everything in and then close it up. We do have to every year kind of act like this is a fortress to keep the voles and the rabbits out. So we do go through, we use a really fine kind of sharp gravel that we put along there that they don't like to dig into. So that helps. And then we make sure that there is a wire cage in the front there. And we have had situations where they have gotten in, especially when we're kind of loading this in, because it takes, it takes several days for us to get this filled up with all the plants. And so in that time, we might not have it as secure, and so they might sneak in. So at that time, we do use poison, but that's the only time we really have to use the poison, and it's just a backup. So usually what we're trying to do, there's usually maybe, 1 or 2 animals that might get in here at the most, and we want to make sure and kill them before they have babies, because if over the winter we have a nest in here and babies hatch, pretty much a huge amount of our crop would be decimated. So fortunately with that technique, we've been lucky so far, and it's much easier to secure this space than it is to do the whole frost cloth and stuff outside. And the plants we have in here tend to break dormancy just a little bit sooner than they would if they were outside. So that's always good, because that means when we're open for the season and we have plants to sell, they're just a little bit ahead of what would have been out in people's yards. So it makes it easier to sell, and also by the time we're selling them, they can already go out there, because usually people are buying after the last frost. So it all works out in the end, but we really do love having this structure here. And we only put the 1 layer on because we're just doing a general protection. Now, if we tried to winter plants over in the regular greenhouse, the problem is in the middle of winter, let's say we have a little heat wave and it gets above freezing. Just getting above freezing, that greenhouse, if it's sunny out, can easily get over 70 degrees. If it gets above 50 degrees, hey, it could be 90 degrees in there. And high temperatures like that for any amount of time will cause a lot of the plants to break dormancy. And if they break dormancy in January or February, we're in trouble because it's going to cool down and it's going to freeze up again, and that can do a lot of damage to those plants, or it can just confuse them, or it means we've got to keep them inside all the way up until May, and we need that space for other plants, so we need these plants to stay dormant as long as possible. So keeping the warmer temperatures out, that helps. Keeping the sun out also helps. So that's kind of the goal with the more cold frame kind of style thing. And we attach the plastic the exact same way. It's just a different type of plastic that we're putting on here. Now, one thing I didn't show you is that all of the sides of these greenhouses have the ability to be rolled up. So there's a little mechanism on them and a metal pole that goes all the way across the length of the greenhouse, and we can wind them up and wind them down, and that allows air to pass through, and that can decrease the temperature of the greenhouse significantly, which is really valuable to us because, I mean, plants want to be warm, but they don't want to be in 100-degree heat, and we also can't work when it's in 100 degrees out, and our customers can't handle those high temperatures. So having those sides up oftentimes lets air move through. Now, we will have exhaust fans in some of our greenhouses, but not all of them, so that's just another bit of it. So, hey, now, the type of plastic we're using, I think we use a 6 mil, and like I said, that has a 4-year lifespan. And this year, to recover a greenhouse with 2 layers of plastic, of the clear plastic, it costs $900 per greenhouse. So it's expensive. Now, that price varies a lot from year to year, and we have tried it where, like, oh, it's really inexpensive this year, let's buy a bunch of extra plastic, but we didn't store it properly. And the problem with it not being stored properly is that when it's folded up and in the roll, it like ended up getting kind of almost like brittle. It didn't slide very well when we tried to open it, and it made putting it up a lot harder, and we're kind of on the fence as to whether or not it decreased its lifespan. I think you have to be able to store it properly, and I don't know what those conditions are, but we found it's better for us to just purchase the plastic when we need it rather than trying to have a stockpile of it. And fortunately, our suppliers are really good about getting that to us when we need it. It's just that we don't have a lot of control over price when that happens, but we are trying a new brand this year, so hopefully that goes well, because let me tell you, if you get a bad brand of plastic, it can really be a reduced lifespan. It could be more apt to get holes or have problems. So they told us it's really a good brand, so we're going to find out. Please, please, please be good. So that's the story of greenhouse plastic. I mean, I hope this was kind of interesting. It wasn't about plants, and I know some of you probably already clicked off, but those of you who are still here, thanks for watching, and I will see you guys all in the next video.